Oh, phew, okay. That was a long introduction. Many, many things. Thank you very much for your introduction. I am delighted to be here today to talk to you about languages of the heart. But I think the first thing I have to say is that hearts do have languages, and not just metaphorically, because mine is going ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump. I have never spoken in front of this many people in my whole life. So, thank you. And I was just sitting over there talking to my heart. We're having this conversation saying, oh, it's okay, just calm down, calm down. It's no problem, because they're ESL people. And you know exactly what I mean. I'm sure you know what I mean. ESL people are just special. After Carol got in touch with me and we were talked on the phone, and I said, yeah, I think I would like to do that. I was having lunch with my husband and said, well, I'm going to go talk at the WAESOL conference. And he said, well, what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, the theme is languages of the heart. So I think I'll just talk about how special ESL people are. That's wonderful. He said, well, what do you mean special? And I said, well, sort of off the top of my head, ESL people are open, accepting, tolerant. They have broad understandings of culture and politics and history and people. They're people who think they can make a difference in the world in what they do every day in their lives by building understanding between cultures and in their own way contribute to world peace. At which point my husband said, you mean they're not in it for the money? Which made me laugh. I have to say that my husband is a former overseas educator with a good sense of humor. So today I thought I'd try to give it a little better definition of ESL professionals having languages of the heart other than saying, well, they're not in it for the money. I would also, if you will indulge me, like to say a few words about the teaching of ESL grammar. I just can't resist. And after 37 years in the field, come to some conclusions about what it means to have languages of the heart. First I need to tell you how I got into ESL, and I know everybody has a story, but I'll tell you how I got into ESL and then got into writing textbooks, because that will influence the other things I have to say. I got into ESL by serendipity, by one of those lucky days of one's life. I was a brand new teacher. I had been hired to teach freshman English at Iowa State University. It was 1965. I was all of 24 years old, which makes me 61, so you don't have to do the arithmetic. I knew that. And one day, in my very second quarter of teaching, I was walking down the hallway of the English building with a colleague on the faculty who taught the only ESL class at Iowa State University, and we ran into the head of the department, and she said to the head of the department, Albert, I have over 40 students. You promised we would break the class in two. And so Albert, Dr. Walker to me, said, all right, we will divide the class. Who will we get to teach it? And there were just 3 of us standing in the hall. And they both looked at me, and the head of the English department said, Betty, how about you? I said, sure. I didn't even know what it was. So that is how I got into ESL. And that afternoon, at 1:10 in the afternoon, I walked into my first ESL class. I handed back some compositions the other teacher had marked, not corrected, and the students were to make their own corrections while I walked around and helped. The student, he was from Egypt. It's one of those moments you never ever forget in your whole life. It's just right there right in front of your face. A student from Egypt raised his hand. I went over and looked at his paper, and he said, I don't understand what's wrong with this. And he had written something like, I wish I could remember the exact one, but it was something like, I was thirsty, so I drank water. He said, what's wrong with that? And I looked at it, and I said to myself, I have no idea. I had never thought of that in my whole life. And I mean, I thought I knew English grammar, right? And so I said also to myself, wow, that is an interesting question. And I said to the student, you all know what I said to the student. I said, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will find out and I will tell you tomorrow, right? Right, well, I said that a lot in my first few years of teaching, believe me. So anyway, that was the beginning of my education in ESL grammar. I do not recommend it. Those of you who are training as teachers, it is a much better way to go to know something before you walk into the classroom, trust me. You'd be a much better teacher sooner. But the field was not the same in 1965 as it is now. At Iowa State University, it was a school of 10,000 students, and there were close to 500 foreign students, and no ESL specialists on the faculty. That was corrected the next year, but the field was very much in its infancy. I'll also say, for those of you who weren't around in 1965, that the publications at that time could fit on 2 average-sized bookshelves. That was it. That was all there was available in ESL text for the students that I was teaching. And compare that to the book displays now, or the book display at TESOL, which is as big as a barn. There was one book, because some of you are some old timers, I think. There's one book that, as we say, I used to say in Iowa, I'm from Iowa clearly, that saved my bacon, was Thomas Crowell's Index to Modern English. Anybody remember that one? A few old timers. Okay, good. That was a good book. Anyway, to move along, now after I'd had 2 quarters of experience teaching, I got a job in a summer institute, teaching, and it was an intensive English institute at the university. The director was fresh from a graduate degree at the University of Michigan, so it was the Lotto Freeze audio lingual system that we were using, and I was assigned, since I was a beginning teacher, to do the Red Book. Now this is you know, for you old timers, the Red Book, which is the pattern practice book. And in that book, in the audiolingual system, what you did for an hour is variations on a substitution drill. In other words, the teacher would say, I went to the bank, and the students would say, I went to the bank. The post office, I went to the post office. He went to the post office for an hour. I found it deadly. The students found it deadly. We were dealing with grammar patterns, so I let them ask questions. And then I did explanations on the board, and then I brought materials to class. And we did a little writing, we did some conversation, we did grammar exercises. One day, the director of the program comes in to visit my class, sees what I am up to, pulls me aside after class and says, Betty, you cannot do that. You are ruining their education. You do not understand the theory behind audiolingual, and you must stay with the book. I said, okay. Went back to my students, said, we can't do this anymore. We have to do what the book. And the students go, oh. Finally, we reach a compromise where I said, okay, we'll do a tutorial. So you're in class all day long. At 4 o'clock, I'll meet you from 4 to 5. We'll do a tutorial every day. To make a long story short, it was almost no time before every student, practically every student in the program, had heard about Mrs. Azar's tutorial and was showing up for this extra class at the end of the day. And another one of those moments that you remember in your life, I just stood there and I said, wow, I must be doing something right. And that is the beginning of my ESL career. And that is the process, when I explained it, that is the process that led to my writing textbooks. It's the process basically of, I was sort of an empty slate. It's a process of finding out what my students needed from me. What is it you need from me? What can I do to help you? And I let my students be my teachers. And in all of the writing I did, my students were always my collaborators. always adapting materials, creating my own materials for all sorts of things, vocabulary, reading, whatever, but then with a real focus on grammar. And it's just like, I'm sure all of you do. I think ESL teachers are just inveterate materials writers. It's just something that's in our blood. We make materials for our students. So for years, I went to class in the intensive, I moved into a full-time intensive language program. For years, I went to class with purple Ditto ink on my face and my clothes and my hands and my eyes and every place. And that was in the old days, too, when it was a hand crank. Okay, some of you, aha. Okay. And when we got an electric Ditto machine, I thought I'd gone to heaven. But anyway, that gets old after a while, and so I put together some materials for a mimeograph copy that I sold to the students at cost. Then one day, a publisher's representative walks into the department and says, "Anybody here writing their own materials?" They point him in my direction. He says, "I understand you're writing your own materials. Have you ever thought about publishing?" And I said, "Me? No, I'm just a teacher." True story. And he said, "That's who writes textbooks." And so in 3 years, my first book, my baby, which is the Blue Book, the book that I had spent probably 12 years of my life writing altogether, took another 3 years. The Blue Book was published in 1981. I'd hoped that other teachers would find it useful, that other people would, in my situation, might be able to use it in their classes. And secretly, I will just share this with you. I hope that enough people would buy it that I could get a new living room carpet and maybe a sofa. I never, ever had any idea that the materials that I wrote would someday be reaching somewhere around 750,000 people every year in every corner of the world. I had absolutely no idea. Well, but the point that I want to make is that the people who write all those books at the TESOL Books display are teachers, just like you. 95, minimum 95, maybe 97, maybe 99% of all ESL textbooks are written by teachers who have found things that work in their classes. And I haven't been in the classroom for a while now, but I still consider myself a teacher. I just have a different venue. I would like to talk just briefly about, go back to my experience with audiolingual, because that was a very instructive experience for me. The experience with the notion that there's one right way, one best way to teach language, and oh, if you don't do it this way, you're going to do a disservice to the students. Well, that of course is not true. And I came early on to distrust bandwagons, to distrust, in other words, the rigid and exclusive implementation of theory. And distrust theorists who claim that they exclusively know how language is learned. I don't think anybody knows it yet. There are so many mysteries as to how language is learned, and to know how the unconscious works. I think that nobody has all the answers to that yet. And I just say, take it with a grain of salt. But I also came to learn about bandwagons, that there are useful insights. And it's just very important as teachers to pick and choose. Very important. Your judgment and your experience is what really matters in doing the best for your students. Some of the bandwagons that I experienced, just very briefly, we won't spend much time on this, but there was TPR, Total Physical Response, with James Asher in the 70s. It can't be, for me, a total curriculum, but it's an excellent technique of combining actions and words and allowing students to listen before they have to produce. A very good influence in the 70s. But you can't build a whole curriculum on it, I didn't think. Then there was a silent way. there were some real true believers. They were on the faculty where I was. The real true believers. Caleb Gategno's Silent Way. Real true believers. And my reaction was, but we're language teachers. We can't not talk in the classroom. I mean, that's just, and that's true. It's just not common sense that we're going to teach language and not speak. But he made a very important point that sometimes, yes, we do need to be quiet. We do need to let our students create their own language. So again, it's a real truth there. Suggestopedia reminded us that it's important to create a comfortable space, physically and emotionally for our students. But as for lowering the lights, playing soft music, I mean, at one time I had a class of maybe 30 19-year-old Saudi Arabians, and I said, I just cannot lower the lights and turn on soft music. No, you know what I'm talking about. Then another bandwagon in the 80s, the natural approach based on Stephen Krashen's theories. And the approach said basically that a second language is supposedly learned in the same ways as the first language. And when I think of the natural approach, I always think of Oscar. And I know you've had students like Oscar. Oscar was an 18-year-old from Peru. And he came to the intensive language program, tested in at the beginning level. And after, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that, I noticed, the other teachers noticed, wow, Oscar's English is really getting good fast. In leaps and bounds. I wonder, we must be doing a good job. So I'm curious, and so I talked to Oscar after class, and I said, Oscar, are you reading a lot? Are you watching a lot of television? Are you making a lot of friends? And Oscar says, no, I don't have time to read. No, I don't have time to watch TV. I have an American girlfriend, and her name is Sally. Right? Right, so I mean, Oscar shows us what meaningful input will do and meaningful interaction and taking advantage of natural aptitudes, and it's what we try to create in our classes, highly motivated students that are really engaged in real life communication opportunities. I mean, all of that is symbolized by Oscar. If we could just bottle that, huh? We could just bottle that. Or maybe we could start a dating service approach to English language teaching. Well, hey, start our own bandwagon. Anyway, to just talk briefly about grammar. In Stephen Krashen's theories, learned language, and this is just nutshell, learned language, in other words, language that is taught, is not acquired, in other words, does not become part of one's functioning language. And I just have to say that that was never my experience as a language learner or as a language teacher. And also, according to his theories, accuracy would just happen sooner or later. And again, with my experience with my students, and I have to be really clear, I'm talking about my students. I'm talking about academically oriented adults with educational goals who, in my experience, are in a hurry. So my experience with my students told me that accuracy could be enhanced and speeded up by the direct teaching of grammar. And my students agreed. So I watched the rise of the anti-grammar bandwagon with great interest and curiosity. I mean, there's been a real anti-grammar bandwagon for about 20 years now, or 15, 20 years. And of course we need to continue to explore the whys and the hows of teaching grammar and to whom. But the baby was being thrown out with the bathwater. I think that some of the anti-grammar bias came from a lack of understanding, a misapprehension of what ESL grammar teachers to academically oriented adults, what ESL grammar teaching is all about. And I would get the impression, especially at TESOL presentations, that this is true, that some of the opponents of teaching grammar thought we were a bunch of little old lady school teachers drilling on grammar rules and rapping our students on the knuckles whenever they made a mistake. Which is not what we do when we are teaching grammar. When we are teaching grammar, we are building foundations. We do not expect immediate mastery. That's why we keep hitting it again and again. We're building comfort levels, we're building fluency, we're building familiarity, we're building a basis for growth. We use grammar as a starting point. It's not the purpose of our teaching, it's the starting point. We use grammar as a springboard for all kinds of developmental skills work, listening, speaking, writing, and even reading. And while we are doing this, we are, of course, providing lots of perfectly wonderful, comprehensible input. And at the same time, we're helping students develop effective self-monitoring tools as they head towards academic situations where a certain degree of accuracy does matter. The emphasis on communicative classrooms and methods has clearly been a positive development and has enriched ESL language teaching. And we have much to thank Krashen for and the many other communicative theorists. But the exclusion of grammar never made sense to me. And I looked for meat on that bone. I really did, and I never found it. Grammar can be overdone, it can be misused, not every way that you teach grammar is helpful. If you teach it as an academic content area, you are not doing the students any good at all. If you're teaching it as a starting point, then they have places to go. But in my experience, in my judgment, in my reading of the research literature, the direct teaching of grammar to academically oriented adults is an integral component of a well-balanced program of language instruction. Now, I don't suppose that surprises any of you that I say that. No. But to me, grammar is at the heart of language. Grammar is what holds it all together. It's its organizing principle. It's what allows language to function. It's what makes all these sounds that we make and all these squiggles that we write down make sense. And it underlies, I think, all the skills and the development of skills. So I think the important point that I want to make is that a communicative approach and a grammar approach are not mutually exclusive, but mutually supportive. This is not an either-or situation. You don't have to choose communicative or choose grammar. You don't have to do all one or all the other. They fit together hand in glove. It's time to bring some grammar back in. Just as the same, you don't ever have to choose between fluency and accuracy. You have to decide the balance. You have to decide the priorities for your particular students and their needs. You don't have to choose between teaching form and teaching meaning. They're inseparable anyway. I mean, they're absolutely inseparable. There is no meaning without form. You just have to figure out how to balance them in your teaching. Grammar can fit into a communicative syllabus, which is what some people do, or communicative methodology can fit into a grammar syllabus, which is what I try to do in my books. In an intensive program, you can have a structural syllabus over here and communicative syllabuses over there, which is what we used to do. It worked I thought, well. Grammar instruction can fit into cooperative language learning, content-based teaching, task-based teaching. There's a session on that this afternoon. There are a number of ways to incorporate grammar in a curriculum, and many teachers like you I know are experimenting right now with ways of doing that. There's no clear answer as to how. There's no one right way to teach grammar to everybody in the whole world, but it certainly seems clear that it should be taught to literate adults, and I would include high school students with educational goals. Much of the research in the 90s and the current thinking seems to show that academically oriented students progress faster with better results with an explicit grammar component. And I myself believe that the anti-grammar bandwagon is running out of steam. H. Douglas Brown, who writes those wonderful books on theory and methodology, Doug Brown said that it's not a question of if we should teach grammar, but how. And I would concur with that. So there's lots of good research going on. We have much to learn, but it's good, I think, to remind ourselves. Nobody has all the answers as to how language is acquired. Nobody knows exactly how our brains process language, and there's so many variables. There's no perfect method. There's no perfect textbook. That does not exist in the world. There is no one and only one right way to teach language in all situations to all students. And that is why the role of teachers is so crucial. You're the ones who know your students. That's where the heart comes in. In this pendulum that we go through in ESL, I mean, I'm doing this almost 40 years now, with competing theories and methodology, it's the teacher and the materials writers who are teachers, who find the balance, who find the ways that work, who find the things, who really decide, I believe, the direction of the field. And the next generation of ESL textbooks will come from teachers just like you, synthesizing theories and finding pragmatic, eclectic solutions that truly work in your classrooms. I believe that we in ESL have an extremely rich and balanced learning environment that we have created. One of the best second language learning environments ever anywhere. And it's what I like to call a stew, just a rich stew that we as professionals have created. But instead of, well, you know what we do, we throw in a little of this and we throw in a little of that, say, oh, there was too much salt. Next time I'm not going to put so much salt in, but I think I'll try a rutabaga. And I say, oh, no, maybe I'll throw in a parsnip next time. This is the stew that we create. This is, all of us have do that, I think, in our own classes. But instead of carrots and rutabagas, we're throwing in pair work, a little TPR, some infogap, some role playing. We use some pop music, we have a debate, then we do silent reading, show a video, little pattern practice, a listening task, a ESL drama class, and then we find email pen pals for our students. The list is endless. We are a very, very inventive group. So we in ESL education, teachers, materials writers, researchers, and theorists, all working together, create this rich stew, and it is a gift that each of us gives to our students. And like any gift, it comes from the heart. And the hearts of ESL professionals, in the hearts of ESL professionals, we only want that our students succeed and reach their goals. And that is the language of the heart we speak as teachers. And now I'd like to switch to another dimension of being an ESL teacher, away outside of the classroom, away from what we do educationally to outside the classroom. A large dimension of our work. And I don't think anything illustrates it better than this resource booklet that was in the registration packet. And the very first sentence says, this booklet contains some useful references, resources, and tips to help ESL teachers deal with situations that may require legal and or social assistance for their students. It is just characteristic of our profession that we extend helping hands in whatever ways we can to meet our students' needs beyond language instruction. And we do it day in and day out as part of our jobs. We are sensitive to students' needs in ways that teachers of other adults may not need to be, whether we're recognizing and discussing culture shock or dealing with immigration concerns or going to such mundane things as how to operate a laundromat. I mean, surely all of you have explained at one time or another how to manage some survival skill. One time I had to explain to a student that a washer and dryer was not an appropriate wedding gift for a teacher on the faculty. Somehow she had mentioned in class that a lot of Americans had washers and dryers, in their homes, but she herself didn't, and she was getting married, and she and her husband were not going to have a washer and dryer, and he was from an oil-rich country, and he said, oh, okay, I'll get her a washer and dryer for her wedding. So, I mean, you just never know. You just, right? You never know what's going to come up, what the day is going to bring. And sometimes, again, speaking from my experiences, students bring us health issues, problems with landlords, and we refer them to the right avenues of help, just as this booklet is prepared so that you can direct your students into the right avenues of help. ESL programs, as a matter of course, provide needed interaction out of class and support for student organizations. And I was just reading in the WAESOL newsletter, this is all an example. There is SABEL, the Student Association for the Betterment of English Language Learners at Central Washington. And the booth they set up for the student union, there's an ESL professional involved in that. I'm sure. I don't even have to know what it is to know that that's true. There's a student newspaper at the Intensive American Language Center at Washington State. It doesn't happen without the help and devotion of ESL professionals going beyond their classroom duties. The same is true of the International Women's Day at Refugee Women's Alliance in Seattle. The students organized it, but you know it would never have happened without the teacher. ESL programs carry on, I think, this is a nice way to look at it, carry on the centuries-old tradition of hospitality to strangers in our midst. It's a tradition that's found in almost all cultures. A few months ago, I was visiting Edmonds Community College, and I was very impressed by their common room. It's a converted classroom. It has comfortable furniture. It has computers. You can sit and read. You can sit and chat. You can get a cup of tea. It's a place for students and teachers to interact. And when you look at it, those kind of comfortable, welcoming places that ESL programs and teachers provide all the time are really just in many ways the modern day expression of hospitality to strangers, making them feel welcome and supported. And that is a big language of the heart that we speak sometimes without even thinking about it. And then in times of geopolitical crisis, my particular one when I was teaching was the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. And of course then there was the terrible, terrible 9/11. In these times, we in ESL are the people who maintain the human connection. We provide the support for people who are caught in something not of their own making. Just very briefly, so you can, those of you who were not teaching at the time of the Iranian hostage crisis, I'd like to tell you briefly my experiences. I was teaching in St. Louis that time in an intensive English program, and we had a number of Iranian students, maybe 20 or 30. And our office got hate calls, we got threatening calls, and our office was broken into at night, and all the files of all the Iranian students were stolen. So somebody had their names and addresses. So our Iranian students had to go into hiding, and we had to find them safe houses. And then if that weren't enough, a man with a shotgun came to the building where our offices were, looking for Iranian students whom he was going to hold hostage and swap for the hostages in Tehran. And fortunately, the campus police, after a couple of hours, convinced him not to do that. But it was a terrifying time, and our students needed our support and our friendship more than they ever did. And I'm sure the same is true today of your Arab students. And I know many of you in the audience could speak better to this than I, but having gone through the Iranian hostage crisis with my Iranian students, I can only imagine the ways in which your Arab students needed your support in those terrible days after 9/11, and still do, given the lingering fear, the suspicion, the profiling of Arab nationals, Arab Americans, the seeming suspension of civil rights for non-citizens, especially if they're from the Middle East. and even the bigotry, of course, is illustrated by that most ignorant and hateful of men, Jerry Falwell. These are all very difficult things for our Arab students to deal with. It's a difficult time to be an Arab in America. And they need our extended hands of understanding and support now more than ever. Again, these are the languages of the heart we speak. So in so many very important ways, we help our students beyond their language needs. ESL teachers, administrators, ESL programs become the grounding and the connection for people who find themselves strangers in a strange land. As a professional group, we are aware of and especially sensitive to and especially respectful of cultural differences and diversity. But as ESL people in our day-to-day work with international students, we see beyond, or I like to think we see beneath those differences and see that our similarities as human beings are far greater and far deeper than our cultural differences. The materials that I write necessarily have a lot of cultural content. You cannot separate language and culture. You cannot separate an author from her culture. But in my materials, I try to go beneath the cultural content to emphasize the things that connect us all, experiences that we all share, as human beings, like sharing food with friends and family. The food may be different, some maybe sit in chairs, some on the floor, but the sharing of food with friends and family is shared across cultures. Worrying about our children, or how good it feels to get home after a long trip and sleep in your own bed. Grief at the death of a loved one, the joy at the birth of a baby, all of these things are common human experiences that are shared across cultures. And one of the best parts of being an ESL professional is getting to reach our hands across cultural barriers and connect human being to human being with our students in ways that many people never get to experience. I have one more story that I'd like to share with you, and that is some correspondence I got recently from the Greater Greensboro, North Carolina Public Library ESL Conversation Club. And I figure if they can just say what club they belong to, their English must be pretty good. But in the mail one day, just opened the mail, I found this booklet that this conversation club in Greensboro had made, basically to thank me for my books. It was a computer project. And you know how when a student out of the blue comes up after class to thank you, you just don't expect it. Or maybe at the end of the term, a few students get together and give you a small gift and saying, thank you very much for your teaching. And you know how the cockles of your heart go, and you're just all smiles. I don't know what cockles are. I haven't figured out that idioms, but my cockles were very, very warm. And it's one of those times when you say to yourself, yes, this is why I'm a teacher. Well, that's what this letter was, but it also made a very important point. In the letter, the ESL Conversation Club said that they knew me, they felt they knew me through my books, and that they felt that I knew them. They ended their correspondence by writing, "We love your books. As Mowgli used to say, we are of one blood, you and us." And one of those cockles. And Mowgli, of course, is the Rudyard Kipling character in the Jungle Book. And they didn't quote it quite exactly, but that's okay. And the letter was signed by people from 17 different countries: Korea, Bangladesh, Brazil, Colombia, Senegal, Bosnia, a veritable United Nations, saying, we are of one blood, you and us. And I just can't help thinking, if only the whole world understood that it is not us versus them, that indeed we are just us. And we're really not that different from one another. If only we could come to the understanding that there's just one earth and one humanity, and now especially one global society. And if only governments could understand what people understand, what ordinary people understand, and if only all people could understand what ESL professionals know about human being to human being across cultures. When you think of all the people from other cultures and countries that we have touched just in this room, and it's clear that collectively, all of us in this room, across the country, and ESL people travel far and wide across the world, add up to a significant positive force in the goodwill and understanding we help create among the peoples of the world. And that is a language of the heart we speak every day. Thank you.
Incredible lady you are.
Thank you. So